It was a week ago that a dam failed at the Mount Poly mine in British Columbia. Millions of cubic meters of mining wastewater, quite possibly toxic, went rushing into nearby creeks, rivers, and lakes. What followed was a water use ban by locals and questions: what caused the breach, and what will be the short and long-term impact on the ecosystem? Well, the Globe's Andrea Wu has been following the story, and we've reached her in Vancouver. Welcome, Andrea. 1 week later, how much do we know about what caused the breach?
We do know that just 3 months ago, the mine was warned for having too much water in its tailings pond. The ministry issued a warning to the mine, and the mine pumped some of that water out into a pit. The Ministry of Energy and Mines has said that the mine passed numerous geotechnical inspections. There were no sort of indicators that something was awry, but that's a bit concerning because obviously something did go absolutely sideways here, and we don't know what that is.
What kind of conversation do you think this spill will spark about mining in general in British Columbia?
There are people who have been very critical about mining regulations in BC for some time already. The Environmental Law Centre at the University of Victoria actually released a report in 2011 that said of 6 enforcement actions that the province took against coal and metal mines from 2006 to 2010. 5 of those penalties were less than $600, which they say is little incentive to comply with the law.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Andrea.
Hi there, I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
You're tuned into Video Radio, independent media for an intelligent world, where we're getting rid of all the propaganda and spin. Well, actually, we're going to cover it a bit, but we're going to cover it from a logical point of view.
Because there's a lot of spin regarding the Mount Poly tailings spill.
The fallout that's coming from this spill right here in British Columbia is immense, and it's got ramifications for right now, for future generations, and above all, for the salmon stock.
Take a look at what the Globe and Mail has decided to release about the impact on the salmon industry.
This is the time of year that the sockeye salmon return to British Columbia's rivers to start a remarkable journey and to eventually spawn. But the breach could impact the migration of sockeye salmon in the Quesnel system. Craig Orr of the Watershed Watch Salmon Society explains why.
British Columbians say salmon is to British Columbia like the French language is to Quebec, but unfortunately this doesn't seem to be translated into protection. There's a lot of debris in the lake moving around and blocking some habitat. The big question is, where are these fish going to spawn? I think we need some assessments from independent biologists to tell us exactly what the extent of the habitat damage is. There are still a lot of questions around toxic metals and the impacts on resident fish and also on the baby sockeye as well. The sockeye are really important for feeding the bears and the eagles and the people. They provide all kinds of ecosystem benefits. The bigger issue is how governments are protecting the environment. And we've seen the federal government pulling back on environmental protection. We've seen the provincial government pulling back to promote development. I think we need better regulations for mines. I think that's quite obvious, and maybe this disaster will help prompt more scrutiny. It's a 4-year cycle for the sockeye, so we won't see the blip next year, but we will see some damage down the road. I think British Columbians and Canadians have some cause to be concerned over the future of this particular run of sockeye.
So the disaster that is being underreported in the media right now, because of course they've got, pet stories on the front page of our local newspaper. They are talking about pets and beauty pageants.
But they're not talking about the impact to our economy that this spill could have ramifications for.
And future generations, of course, are being left to the wind by our government. Remember, our local premier, Christy Clark, got paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep her in office by the mining industry that she's currently representing.
But she was very quick to get out in front of this and get her spin into the media.
We've got 3 quick clips, and let's just take a look at how propaganda works. And Christy Clark, following the footsteps of Stephen Harper, and of course, Stephen Harper's media manager.
All results came back meeting the requirements for Canadian and BC drinking water standards, and we are waiting for more results to come in.
No one understands how this happened this time. So you know, they say that they met all the specs, but we are going to understand thoroughly and in detail how this occurred. And once we understand that, if changes need to be made, we are going to make them for every mine across the province. But again, it's impossible to assign responsibility, to assign blame for certain aspects of it before we understand what exactly happened. And I think getting the facts, and we need a little bit of time to do that, and that is absolutely what we're doing right now.
So Christy Clark, our pipeline premier, spinning it towards the mining industry and, you know, doing a good job representing a corporation that profits so few.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how she got into office anyway.
Well, we know how she got into office. Hundreds of thousands of dollars from the mining industry. And, of course, Stephen Harper's media manager. Yes, we still remember the pro-pipeline prime minister himself lending his spin doctor to the, we don't call it the PMO, we call it the Premier's office?
I guess, yeah.
I don't know. All I call it, well, the effluvia in that obvious office. Anyways, money.
Money. Who's going to pay for this cleanup?
Yes, exactly who's going to pay for the cleanup. It's going to be me and you. And of course, the mining industry. Well, personally speaking, I think they should seize all of the assets of the mining industry until they clean up their mess.
But Christy Clark says, whatever it takes. Check out her spin.
They're saying that it could take up to 550,000 truckloads to get rid of some of the tailings, that silt, the gray slurry that you still see in the creek bed there. Who's going to clean that up? Who's going to pay for it? And what can the province do to ensure the work is done correctly?
Well, there's something like $13 million a bond that the company has sitting with the Ministry of the Environment. Certainly, as necessary, we're going to be dipping into that to ensure that the minimum amount of cost for this cleanup is borne by taxpayers in the province. But at the same time, we want to make sure this gets cleaned up. We want this community to know that we are going to get the job done to bring it back to its former glory, whatever that takes.
A couple of former employees have come forward, one of them even contending that he tried to warn the Provincial Environment Ministry that there were problems at that tailings pond before, but was ignored. What's your reaction to that?
That we want to talk to him. We want to talk to every single person who says that they knew of a concern beforehand, that they've got an issue they want to bring forward through the investigation. And so anyone, any former employee, any member of the community, current employee, we want to sit down with them, understand the nature of their concern, because that needs to be part of the investigation.
So once again, I'm saying it straight out. If the government was really protecting us, they would make a point out of seizing the assets, because we, later on, we've got a clip on the cause. And we know what the cause was. We don't have to study the cause. We know it was their fault and the government's fault for not doing their job.
And of course, in the first clip of this broadcast, they did talk about how there's not a lot of incentive to follow government regulations.
No, they get little slaps on the wrist and little notes saying, please clean up your act, and then just continue doing their nonsense. Right now, let's talk about how they're going to analyze the problem.
Let's watch Christy carefully not answer the question put to her by the reporter.
Very carefully.
NDP leader John Horgan and First Nations in that region are all calling for an full independent inquiry. Can you commit to that, yes or no?
Well, we're still gathering the early evidence here and trying to understand what happened. The conservation officers who are leading this are independent of government. They have the ability to lay charges. They go directly to the Crown. They don't go to the government, and we do not direct them. So I trust that they will be able to be independent in this. But I do understand that people want to know that there's, that it's going to be completely unbiased. And so in the coming days, we'll make sure that the process is one that ensures that independence, that there's transparency, and that there's always the checks and balances. So I'll give you an example in the water sampling. We send it out to government scientists, and we send it out to independent third-party labs. So we can always ensure that it's completely unbiased in the results that we get.
All right, I appreciate your time. Thanks very much, Premier, and we'll catch up to you when you're back in town.
So, from the monumental pile of effluvia, yes indeed, we have Christy Clark and, of course, her supporters falling in line behind a very small group of people that profit from resource extraction and, of course, the destruction of our environment.
And she is really good at not answering questions.
I know, that was awesome. Yes or no, okay? Yes or no, the guy says, and she just goes off on trying to explain how the people they pay are independent.
Yeah, government scientists, that should be in quotations.
Government scientists? This would be right up there with creationists. Oh yeah, okay, don't forget about the GMO scientists. Oh yes, we want to listen to them.
And of course, we did have the input from the Ministry of Mining here in BC.
Yes.
And of course, they had to defend their position as well. And they did a, well, not too bad a job of it.
When it comes down to spin and propaganda, they got it on the money. Check this out.
Millions of liters of wastewater from a gold and copper mine have drastically altered the landscape near Likely. The physical damage is clear, but Angela Waterman of the Mining Association of British Columbia says the reputation of the industry remains intact.
We have tremendous resources and we have a highly regulated system in British Columbia. There's no reason not for optimism.
The Carrier-Sicani Tribal Council is not echoing that optimism in a release calling the breach a complete disaster, saying the Mount Polley incident raises concerns about other tailings ponds like the ones at the Endako mines and Chemist South mines. The Tribal Council is now calling on Imperial Metals to stop all operations, be held accountable by the Crown, and be subject to major policy reform in British Columbia. Among other conditions, the Council wants more thorough environmental assessments for establishing mines. UNBC Associate Professor Phil Owens has also been vocal in calls for more oversight of BC's mines. He says the risk of a similar breach is too high.
We don't know. We've not seen many incidences like this in the world. Dam breach failures of this magnitude are very rare, thankfully. So we just don't know. And this is it is a reasonably pristine environment. There's lots of fish that are important for the local economy as well. We have lots of big animals, the wolves, the bears, etc.
In the meantime, the province's mining association, like the rest of the province, is still waiting on a conclusive investigation.
It's a very rare event. It's not a common occurrence at all, and so it'll be quite interesting to find out what the root cause of the incident is.
So when you're making that chunk of cash every year, your morals, your reality is right out the door.
Obviously, they don't really care about the environment or the impact that their industry has on our livelihood and our very planet that we live on.
And if you really listen to it, you could hear that he took no responsibility at all. He started pointing to regulations. We know the way that it works with laws and regulations. People who have morality will follow the laws and regulations. People who have no morality, of course, will squeak by and go and ignore them. And this is what the mining industry has done.
But wait a minute, they're a corporation. Are you saying that corporations can't have morality? How can an artificial construct have anything resembling morality?
Well, of course, that would be the responsibility of the people in charge, and they're only responsible for their paychecks. That's why we do what we do. Coming up in section number 2, we're going to be talking to or listening to a former employee of the mining company that knew about this problem 2 years ago.
And we'll also be talking about the issues that the pipelines are facing coming out of the oil sands.
We're talking about spills and spin, propaganda, and we're talking about it right here with Video Radio. I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned. We got more mock-worthy news coming up.